There's a particular kind of frustration that comes from watching a brilliant person do something spectacularly stupid. Not a momentary lapse, not a bad day, but a sustained, confident, deeply committed pattern of thinking that any reasonably clear-headed person could see was wrong. And yet, there they are. Someone with a wall of credentials, someone who can hold complex equations in their head, someone who has read more books than most people own, arguing passionately for something that simply doesn't hold up. And the maddening part isn't the mistake, it's the certainty. You've probably seen it: the doctor who smokes, the economist who makes terrible personal financial decisions, the therapist who can't hold together their own relationships, the philosopher who understands the theory of ethical behavior and yet behaves, well, rather badly. Intelligence clearly visible, judgment conspicuously absent. So what exactly is happening there? Because we tend to treat intelligence as a kind of general-purpose tool, as if a mind that's sharp enough will naturally cut through confusion, bias, and self-delusion. As if intelligence, given enough of it, eventually becomes wisdom. But that assumption turns out to be one of the more consequential mistakes we make about human cognition. Intelligence, in the way psychologists typically measure it, is really about processing, speed of thought, working memory, the ability to identify patterns, to hold multiple variables in mind simultaneously, to solve problems with the right kind of internal structure. These are real capacities. They matter. A high-functioning mind in these terms is genuinely doing something remarkable. But here's the thing. None of that tells you what to do with the answer. Pattern recognition doesn't tell you which patterns are worth caring about. Processing speed doesn't slow you down long enough to ask whether you're solving the right problem. And memory, whatever its capacity, faithfully stores both the insightful and the deeply mistaken with equal fidelity. The researcher Keith Stanovich spent years looking at exactly this gap, the space between how smart someone is and how well they actually reason. He gave it a name: Dysrationalia, the inability to think rationally despite having adequate intelligence. And his findings were striking, not because they were surprising, but because they confirmed something most of us have quietly suspected: that intelligence and rational thinking are not the same system. They can come apart, and in high-functioning minds, they often do. Here's where it gets genuinely strange. Intelligent people aren't just as prone to irrational thinking as everyone else. In certain specific ways, they can be worse. Because intelligence doesn't protect you from bias, it equips you to defend it. When a less analytically capable person holds a flawed belief, they may struggle to justify it under pressure. But a highly intelligent person has the verbal dexterity, the pattern-matching ability, the sheer cognitive fluency to construct elaborate, internally coherent defenses of things that are simply wrong. They can take a conclusion they've already committed to emotionally and build a retrospective architecture of logic around it that sounds extraordinarily convincing to others, and, more dangerously, to themselves. This is what psychological research calls motivated reasoning, and intelligence amplifies it rather than corrects it, which leads to a particular trap that high achievers fall into more often than they'd like to admit: the trap of expertise that doesn't travel. A person becomes genuinely excellent in their field, and through that process, they begin to associate their intelligence with their identity. Being right becomes part of who they are, so when they venture outside their domain, into politics, nutrition, economics, relationships, they bring the confidence of expertise without the actual expertise. And because they're intelligent, they can generate plausible-sounding reasoning, enough to convince themselves, at least, that they know what they're talking about. The ego, it turns out, is not interested in accuracy. It's interested in consistency. It wants the story of who you are to hold together, and admitting you were wrong, that you reasoned badly, that you were overconfident in a domain you don't actually understand, that threatens the story. So the intelligent mind doesn't abandon the belief, it defends it, more cleverly usually than a less capable mind could manage. And there's one more layer worth examining. Something Stanovich also identified as cognitive miserliness, the tendency to default to fast, effortless, automatic thinking, even when the situation calls for careful, deliberate reasoning. Now, you might assume that a highly intelligent person, with all that capacity available to them, would simply use it. But capacity isn't habit. Having a powerful engine doesn't mean you run it at full throttle every time you pull out of the drive. Most of the time, even brilliant minds take the path of least cognitive resistance. They go with the first answer that feels right. They pattern match to something familiar. They trust the intuition that has usually served them well without stopping to ask whether it's applicable here. Effort, even mental effort, even pleasurable mental effort, is still effort. And the brain, however sophisticated, is always looking for the more economical route. So what we're left with is this. Intelligence is a remarkable thing, but it is a tool, not a compass. It can help you get somewhere faster without telling you whether that somewhere is worth going. It can help you build an argument without helping you determine whether the argument is true. It can process the world with extraordinary precision while remaining entirely blind to the assumptions that structure that processing. Wisdom is something different. Wisdom involves self-awareness, the ability to observe your own thinking from a slight distance. It involves intellectual humility, the genuine willingness to be wrong, to revise, to start over. It involves knowing where your knowledge ends, and crucially, it involves the slow, effortful discipline of questioning yourself, especially when you feel most certain. Intelligence without that self-awareness is just sophistication in the service of whatever the ego has already decided to believe. If any of this connected with you or made you see intelligence and clear thinking a little differently, you'd probably enjoy the kinds of conversations I explore here. I like digging into the quieter side of psychology, the patterns, contradictions, and behaviors most people don't really stop to think about. The stuff that can be uncomfortable sometimes, but also strangely honest. And if you've got your own thoughts on this, drop a comment below. I genuinely like to hear your perspective. And if this sounds like your kind of thing, subscribe so you don't miss the next video.